Hi, my name's James. I'm a English teacher based on the Wirral. I teach English literature and I specialise in teaching English language. I have taught for nearly 10 years and I've also taught for nearly 12 years privately as a tutor. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to talk you through my approach to English language paper one. I'm an examiner for AQA also, so I'm going to give you my breakdown of the paper from a teacher's perspective, but also from an examiner's perspective. So I'm going to be talking through my approach to how I would work through the exam paper, but also as an examiner, how I mark the paper as well, the kinds of things that I'm looking for from candidates. So I'm going to talk you through it and we'll work through it from question one to question five. So let's get straight into it. So as you can see on the screen here is English language paper one. This is a past paper from 2024. And we'll just get to section A, the first question, which is question one. So, section A, reading. Answer all questions in this section. You are advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section. So, as it being an exam, we have an abundance of time in lessons. We have an abundance of time in our private time when we're completing homework and we're doing independent private study. But unfortunately, in the exam, time is not a luxury that we possess. We only have 45 minutes for section A and 45 minutes for section B. So time is really tight. So I will say always keep an eye on the clock, manage to pace yourself correctly and make sure you get through to all the questions. And what I'll do at the end is I will explain my approach. I will tell you how I would approach the questions in non-sequential order. So first question here, read again the first part of the source from lines 1 to 6. So really important. It's probably an obvious thing to say, but make sure you read the question, read it again. You're only being asked to read lines 1 to 6 from the source, and that is all you need to do. If you look for information beyond the lines, you won't get any marks. It is really specific for what the examiners are looking for. Any information from lines 1 to 6. And it says list 4 things about Mary from this part of the source. So that is all you're doing. 4 things about Mary from this part of the source. It's worth 4 marks. So 4 to 5 minutes max. I would say from an examiner's point of view, certainly from a teaching point of view, I wouldn't prioritize this question too much. I would maybe return to it at the end of the exam if you are not sure that you've got the full 4 marks. Again, there are lots of questions in the paper that are worth far more marks. For example, question 5 is worth 40 marks. But as we get to that, I'll explain my sequence. So, list 4 things. We're only looking at lines 1 to 6. And we'll just have a look here. So, for question one, this is the mark scheme here. This is as an examiner, this is what I would use. So it says give 1 mark for each point about Mary. Responses must be drawn only from lines 1 to 6 and responses must show some evidence of selection. So as an example here, you've got quite an extensive glossary of information that myself as an examiner, I would be allowed to mark and give marks for. So as you can see there, she was bored, she was thirsty, she was hot. It's fairly explicit. It's fairly straightforward information there. It's AO1, Assessment Objective 1. So identify and interpret explicit and implicit information and ideas and select and synthesize evidence from different texts. So won't be too concerned with the latter half. It's the first half there. It's interpret explicit, what is obvious, implicit, what we have to read between the lines. Okay. There are some caveats. These are responses that, as an examiner, I would be encouraged to reject, as you can see there. So make sure, if I were you, I would just go straight for the obvious, explicit information that is there on the page. We don't want to waste too much time on this question if we can help it, because we're always thinking there are questions with bigger marks that we are trying to prioritize completing to the best of our ability. Okay, so With that being said, that is question one completed. Question number two. Look in detail at this extract from line 7 to 17. So all you're doing, you've got line 7 to 17 here in this rectangle. So this is the only place that you need to look for information at this stage in the exam paper. Question two, you've got all the information there. So it says, how does the writer use language here to describe the effects of the heat? So as a teacher, I'd be tempted first with my group. I want to look at the question. The question's really important, and it's always important that you read the question, you read it again. Maybe you might even need to read it a third time just to ensure that you're really focused and clear about what you are being asked to do. So how does the writer use language here to describe the effects of the heat? So I always break these questions down into three. How? How are they using language? What's the effect of the various language techniques? What is the effect on the reader in terms of what the writer has used in their vocabulary? How are they trying to make us think and feel? Okay. What is the effect on you? How do you think and feel? What can you picture in your mind from the vocabulary that the writer has selected in this extract? What are they trying to make us think and feel? What are they trying to make us question about the world? What themes are being explored? What's the message, perhaps? Are there bigger concepts? And I'll explain this a little bit more in a second. I will show you a document from AQA that examiners and teachers were provided with recently, which helps us as professionals, as practitioners, to think about how we can support our students in approaching these questions. Because I think a lot of the time, students sometimes are a bit unsure about what it is they're meant to be commenting on, what they're unsure about how they are meant to be approaching the question, but I'll explain that a little bit more in a second. I'll show you a document. So how do they use language? So again, language can be simple things like nouns, verbs, adjectives, going on to perhaps the more sophisticated metaphor, similes, personification, onomatopoeia, those kinds of things. The focus of the question here is describe the effects of the heat. So what that is asking you to do, as I'm sure it is evident and it is obvious to you watching this video, how has the writer used words to describe the effects of the heat? How is it affecting people? You know, imagine on a hot sunny day, perhaps you're in your garden, you're outside on the street, or you may be going for a walk. You could even be on holiday. It's a hot day. We all know that it really can affect us, the heat. So we're thinking in this extract about how the heat is affecting things, how it is changing, how is it affecting the environment, how is it affecting the characters. Okay. So I would always do that first. Highlight how to think about, right, what's the effect? What are my initial impressions? The word choices. And then this is the focus here. Highlight this, describe the effects of the heat. So that is our focus there. You could include the writer's choice of words in phrases. Could basically means you should. This is what you need to do. It's a bit of a non-negotiable really, although it is worded as an optional, it is a non-negotiable in my view. So words and phrases, language features and techniques, and sentence forms. Okay. 8 marks, 8 to 10 minutes on this question. What I will show you is the mark scheme for this. So this is assessing AO2, so to explain, comment on, and analyze how writers use language and structure to achieve effects and influence readers using relevant subject terminologies to support their views. So for this question, for question two, we're focused on the language. We're not necessarily focusing on structure just yet. I will just have a look at the bottom. I will have a look at level one. And I will have a look at level two, but I'll keep this on the screen here. If you wish to screen grab it, it might be a wise idea for you just to help you with your revision. So at level one, it's simple, limited comment there, 1 or 2 marks. So it shows simple awareness of language, offers simple comment on the effects of language, and selects simple references. makes simple use of subject terminology, and is not always appropriately synthesized and used. So as you can see here, it's a really quite basic and simple response. The heat lizards darted over the rocks like flames. The words flames tell us they were hot like fire, and the word darted shows the lizards are fast. So it's fairly explicit, it's fairly obvious, but it's almost a retelling of what we can see, what we can read. And I think, you know, the vast majority of people will be able to deduce and extract those meanings there. From an examiner's point of view, we can award marks, but it's not really telling us anything. And the markers know that they can infer that. We're looking for students to award the higher level marks, your level threes and your fours, which tell us something interesting, which really unpack and dissect the meanings of the word choices there, demonstrating that a student has thought about, well, what's the effect on me? How can I think and feel about this? So it shows perceptive and detailed understanding of language, and I'll just leave it there. So at a top level, I will just read this extract for you quickly. So the image of the heat waves beat up out the hot stone shows how powerfully violent the effects of the heat is. The stones are inert, and yet the intense heat creates a sense of oppressive movement in the waves that Mary can see. Further, the writer uses a simile to describe how the heat lizards darted over the rocks like flames, and the imagery of the lizards transforming into fire conveys Mary's perception of the heat's power to change elements of of nature. The word darted extends the images of the lizards as being able to move swiftly and erratically, as does fire. So as you can see there, the vocabulary is really expanding the dissection and the analysis of the initial quotes that have been chosen there. So again, it is really giving us perceptive and detailed language analysis, which is what we're looking for as examiners toward that top level. And I will just show you as well the recent document I mentioned earlier. So English language working towards outstanding grades. As you can see, this is from AQA. This was published last year. However, it is still directly relevant. Nothing has really changed in the criteria. So I always teach this. I'll leave this on the screen here if you wish to screen grab it. This is really, really valuable for students who are maybe at a stage where they're still kind of formulating ideas about what to write about. They maybe perhaps be a bit unsure. I always say to my students, right, if you've got question two, we found a quote, perhaps we want to think about these four areas here. Okay, so conceptual, the ideas, the context, the time and place, technical, which is the craft, is how the piece of writing has been created and put on the page, so to speak, and also emotional as well, feelings. So always think about these four areas. If you go into an exam, and you're thinking, right, I've got 10 minutes. What on earth am I going to talk about? Think about these four areas. So the big ideas, the feelings, the time and the place, and the craft. So I challenge my students to think, right, if you find a quote, what are the big themes and ideas being explored in the text? Or you could have a look at the message. What do you think the message is from the writer to the reader? The context. What does the text remind us of? What does it remind you of? What experiences of the world can you relate this to? Can you relate it to being on holiday? Can you relate it to being a hot day in the UK, perhaps, or wherever you may be? Why do you think that? Always explain. That's my favorite word. Explain why. Examiners want to see why you think that and how that relates to the question. Okay. Or what does it tell? What it tells us about the world? Maybe you could be inclined to say hot weather has always been difficult for the environment, for humans, for animals and creatures, and so on. Could we link it to the theme of perhaps the weather changing, climate change, perhaps, or how humankind has always faced challenges with the weather, things like that? Emotional, this is a really good one and a really easy one to get marks for. What the text makes you think and feel, explain why. Again, that important three-letter word, why. Always explain why. Don't just tell me. Imagine I'm the examiner You've come out with some really great and interesting and perceptive response to your emotions in relation to the statements, in relation to the text, but you've not explained why. Okay. So always explain why you think and feel a certain way. How might the characters feel? How might the narrator or the speaker feel? Could you offer a psychological analysis of how the characters feel? Again, always explain why. Think about the form. It's from a novel, so it's a long form story. Think about how does the description of the heat, does it foreshadow anything? Is it building us up for something to come later on? Think about the implied audience. Who do you think might enjoy this? Who do you think may not enjoy it? Who do you think are the people who may ask questions about this text, or who do you think might relate to it the most? What's the purpose of the text? What is it trying to teach us about the world? Okay, so this interpretation grid, this is really invaluable. I have had success with a lot of my students in terms of developing their analytical thinking solely based on this. It has been really invaluable for me as a teacher, but also as an examiner as well. So I really can't underestimate this that's on the screen here now. You're always thinking about, you don't have to answer all of these questions, but maybe if you go into an exam, you're thinking certainly about the four, maybe just pick a question for each one. And if you can put that each question into your analysis, your likelihood of being awarded higher marks dramatically improves. Okay, so I can't emphasize that enough. So question two, we've had a look at that. Let's move on to question three. So question three, you now need to think about the whole of the source. So as it says, you need to read the whole source. Okay, not just a bit of it, not just maybe the start or maybe the middle of the whole thing. So this text is taken from the middle of a novel. So that's information not just there for fun, or it's not just there by accident. Everything that's on this page here is really important for us. So the text from the middle of a novel, what can we expect there? You know, we're past the point of characters being introduced, we're past the point of settings being introduced. Maybe we're also past the point, if we're thinking about Freytag's pyramid, of an inciting incident, and perhaps we're heading on our trajectory, our narrative trajectory towards the climax of the story through rising action and tension. So just think about that. Always check this question here. Think about, well, where are we? And that is obviously going to inform you, not obviously, but it's going to inform you of where we are. It could be the beginning of the story, could be the end. We so happen to be in the middle. So, how has the writer structured the text to interest you as a reader? Now, for the 2026 exam, the wording of this statement will change. It will change to something like, how has the writer structured the text to build tension or to build suspense? It will be specific because here it says to interest you. Well, it's quite vague, really, isn't it? It's to interest you. Well, how would it interest someone? It's not very specific. Interest me in what way? But for the 2026 exam, you can speak to your teacher or your tutor or an education professional who specializes in English, and they will tell you similar thing to me, or they'll tell you the same thing to about as I've just said. Then in 2026, the wording will be very specific. So bear that in mind. Again, you could, which means you have to, it's a non-negotiable. What the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning of the source, and how and why the writer changes this focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So we're not thinking about language features, we're thinking about structure. So things like focus shifts, sentence structure, time shifts, foreshadowing, again, beginning and middle and end. We're not thinking about metaphor, similes, personification, those kinds of things. We're thinking about the building blocks of the part of the text that we're studying. And what I always do is I break it down into beginning, middle, and end, and think about what are we focused on at the start? How does that change towards the middle? What are we focusing on the end? And has any tension or any suspense built Is the mood and tone the same at the start as it is at the end? We're thinking about that transition, that structural transition of how the tone, the mood, the focus, the suspense has changed from the beginning to the end of the extract. So if we have a look at question 3 here on the mark scheme, it's AO2. Explain, comment, and analyze how writers use language and structure. Structure being the operative part of assessment objective 2A. So that's what we're focusing on. So I'll just show you level 1. So simple and limited comment, 1 to 2 marks. Shows a simple awareness of structural features, offers simple comments on the effect of structure, select simple references or examples. So I'll just leave that there on the screen. I'm sure you don't need me to read that for you. But a very simple response that we can award 1 to 2 marks for as examiners. The text begins with a description of the heat where it says, suddenly the heat became intolerable, which sets the scene so we know that Mary and Dick live in a really hot place. Then the writer says, as time passed, the heat became an obsession. So we know that the heat keeps getting worse over time. So the student there has, they've used some text from the extract and they've made some simple comment. But again, it was similar to question 2 when I looked at level 1. It was fairly limited. It was fairly elementary in its analysis and its overall thought. However, there are marks available. The student will get 1 to 2 marks for that. But for our level 3s and our level 4s, I will just focus on level 4 for this exemplar. We're again looking for a student who shows perceptive and detailed understanding of structural features. So it's really crucial that A, you remember that you're focusing on structure, you're not focusing on language. It's a frustration, but more, I feel a sense of sadness for students when I see them in exams because they have just solely focused on language in question 3. We're not focusing on language. It's always structure. Okay. So if you're unsure about your structure, I strongly advise that you maybe visit BBC Bitesize after you've jumped off this video. Type in what are structural features and you do a bit of revision on structural features and you access their resources. Obviously, there are more revision resources available, but that's a really good starting point. So this is an indicative standard. So this is an example of level 4 top mark. So the opening focus on how suddenly the heat became intolerable is a moment of exposition in which we learn how unaccustomed Mary is to life that she is now part of. The fact she is already at her breaking point with the heat at the very beginning of the extract implies that there will be a climactic moment when she snaps. This becomes more evident through time shift in paragraph 2 as time passed. The absence of detail here suggests that Mary is so consumed by the heat that time seems to have become irrelevant and immeasurable to her, and she appears to be losing her grip on reality. So the effect there is really detailed and it's really expansive and it's really picking apart the psychological impact that the heat's having on the character of Mary. But also we've got our structural vocabulary being used here as well. So the student here has been really specific. They're really zooming in on the details there. But what they're also doing as well is they're thinking again about the technical, contextual, conceptual and emotional aspects, psychological assessment there of Mary. And again, for the top level marks, this is what the examiners are looking for, the interpretation, these kinds of questions being asked. Okay, so really help yourself out by focusing on those. Okay, so question 3, we will move on to question 4. So the 20-mark question. Focus this part of your answer on the second part of the source from line 18 to the end. So again, read the question thoroughly. It's line 18 to the end, nothing before line 18. And this is where we're focusing on. This is what we're being asked to focus on and answer. So, the statement, a student said, Dick's anger towards Mary is really unfair. The writer makes it clear that Mary is totally powerless in this relationship. To what extent do you agree? Well, how far do we agree? Do we completely agree with this student? Do we have a balanced view? Or do we completely disagree and dismiss what the student has said and prove them otherwise? Okay. So the focus is Dick's anger towards Mary is really unfair. Okay. We need to find evidence for that. The writer makes it clear that Mary is totally powerless in this relationship. Interesting. We need to find evidence again. How is this so? Okay. So in your response, you could, which is our AQA code for you should, consider whether Dick's anger is unfair. Evaluate how the writer presents Mary and Dick's relationship and support your response with references to the text. Okay. So whatever form and structure you're using in terms of your paragraph response, we've obviously always making our point, using evidence, we're giving initial analysis, we're developing and we're giving deeper analysis, and I will talk about using the interpretation grid here, this quadrant, for how you can really develop and give more detailed analysis in your questions and giving the examiners more reason to award you higher marks because that's what we're looking for. So what we need to do is we'll just jump over to question 4. And just forgotten to say as well, for question 4, you can focus on both language and structural features to be considered for level 3 and level 4, the higher band of marking. You need to focus on sourcing structural features as well as language features to be awarded higher marks. Okay, so this is what the examiners are looking for. So it is AO4, evaluate text critically and support this with appropriate textual references. So it's about finding your sources, it's about finding your quotations, and it's also about being critical. And critical for what I would interpret as is being very critical here. So thinking, really breaking things apart, being almost like a surgeon of language. You're really cutting things up and you're really dissecting things and you're really thinking about answering all of these questions here and importantly, explaining why. Why do you suggest that the character is feeling this way psychologically? How is the construction, the crafting, the text? Why is the writer deliberately chosen to do it this way? Okay, so really being critical. So for level 1 response, simple, limited comment. So 1 to 5 marks. And again, you can see the word in here. So it shows simple, limited evaluation, makes simple, limited response to the focus of the statement. It shows limited understanding of writer's methods. So again, the student is not really they might be specific about the language technique, but they're not really making any comment and not really showing any understanding of the specific choice of language methods or structural methods and how they affect the reader when they're reading the text. How is it making them think and feel and so on. And again, there it selects simple, limited textual references and it makes simple, limited evaluative comments. And for convenience, these examples are color coded as well. So for a level 1 response, I will read. I do think that Dick's anger is unfair because Mary just used some water. And when he finds out, it says he looked at her as if she had committed a crime. So we've got a point and we've got some evidence. This is mean because she only wanted to cool herself down, so she isn't a criminal. So it's a response. It's a fairly simple offer of analysis, but it's certainly nothing critical that we would consider as level 2 and beyond. The writer's use of the word crime shows that he thinks she has done something really bad. Okay, offers something, but doesn't really pick anything apart, doesn't really offer me anything critical or anything really analytical. It does say that he is suddenly sorry at the end, which shows that he feels bad. Okay, so there's some offer of analysis there, but as you can see, it's nothing that's really developed at all. Nothing really that's going to get the student out of level one. If we jump up to our level three and level four, I will just focus on level four here. So, a level four response shows perceptive and detailed evaluation. And as you can see again, we've got the color code breakdown here for response to the focus of the statement, shows perceptive understanding of writer's methods and selects a range of judicious textual details and evaluates critically and in detail the effects on the reader. So, the intensity of Dick's anger towards Mary could be considered as unfair, as her lack of understanding of the value of water presents her as criminal. So really developed, really unpicked and really critical point made by the student there. So that's really exciting, really engaging from an examiner's point of view. It's like, right, I want to see how you can break this down and how you can develop that. What are you going to say? When she tells him she's been using the water, he looks at her as if she had committed a crime, which is an irrational reaction to her rational desire to cool herself. Okay, so a really interesting, really well argued point made by the student there. The writer uses this simile to present Mary as both a criminal and a prisoner, suggesting she is trapped in the relationship, the heat and the farm. So really, again, really developed there in the understanding of methods. Either way, we see Mary as powerless to escape in this moment. However, Dick's guilt can be seen more explicitly when he's suddenly sorry at the end. By by presenting his sudden need for forgiveness, the writer conveys Dick's fear of losing Mary, placing her in the ultimate position of power. So again, really developed, really well understood approach to the question there, really well argued critically. And again, thinking about the characters as almost, they are like real people. And if you can achieve that, I always say to my students, always think about the characters as if they were real. Imagine you're inside the story and you're experiencing everything with them. How would you think and feel, and how would you respond to treatment and behavior such as this? But again, always coming back to this interpretation grid here, think about the emotional, conceptual, contextual and technical. I think the student has really effectively committed a psychological analysis, focusing on themes and big ideas and what the text makes us think and feel and why as well. So they've really placed themselves inside the story there. So that is really, really interesting. So with that being said, question 4, for 20 marks, you're looking 3 to 4 paragraphs. But again, it's the quality over the quantity of your writing. I can't emphasize that enough. Really think about unpacking your ideas and really explaining what you think. Okay. So the big one, question 5 at the end here. With the whole text and with the questions of paper 1, it's building us up, and it's building us up towards the very end of the reading section, and we're going on to the writing section. So let me just jump over here. So section B, you are advised to spend about 45 minutes on this section, writing full sentences, and you're reminded of the need to plan your answer. So you should leave enough time to check your work at the end. So question 5, we've got 2 options here. The statement is, a magazine has asked for contributions for their creative writing section. So it's quite specific, but it's quite vague as well. I mean, a magazine has asked for contributions. Do we really know what that magazine is? What title could it be? I am obviously aware that we live in 2026, and when I was younger, magazines were a lot more prevalent than they are now. Obviously the migration and the shift over to digital content, magazines may not be as relevant to younger people as they once were. But think about the situation there. You've got to entertain this as if it was a real life situation. You're going to enter a magazine competition, you're going to write, and your work is going to be published. So we've got 2 choices. We can either write a description of a very hot place as suggested by this picture. So a description. Imagine you're inside this picture here. Doesn't have to just be this picture. It's not a description of what you can see in that picture. Far from it. I do not want you to do that. What I want you to think about is the wording of this question. Write a description of a very hot place as suggested by this picture. So think about this image here that you see. Its initial inspiration. Again, it's all about images and words as stimuli. What do they make us think and feel? Can you relate to this picture? Does it remind you of a holiday? Does it remind you of a hot day? Does it remind you of a painting or a photograph you've seen or taken or anything? It's a suggestion, okay? You can base your description on any experience that you wish, as long as it aligns with the wording here. So a very hot place, as long as it is linked in some way. You could perhaps write about being in a hot kitchen, or you could write about um, traveling to the sun, or you could write from the perspective of an insect walking across this dirt. It is entirely up to you. It's your interpretation, just as long as we focus there on a very hot place. We've got another option at the bottom here. Write a story about a disagreement. Okay, so we could still use inspiration from this image. We've got our keyword there, disagreement. So again, it's specific, but it's also quite vague as well. It's two things in one, really. A disagreement, that could be something as simple as having a fallout with a friend. It could be something international where two countries have a disagreement and they have a major fallout. It's really open to your interpretation. It's what do you think is suitable? Okay, so disagreement is the key word, but it's open to you for your interpretation. I'll go through the mark criteria in a second, but as you will undoubtedly know, it's 40 marks, so between 40 and 45 minutes. 24 marks are awarded for your content and organisation, and 16 marks are awarded for your technical accuracy. So that is your spelling, your punctuation, your grammar, and so on. So you've got two options, but you can only pick one. You either do a description or you do a narrative. So with your story, what I would be tempted to do, I'm going to do this in reverse order. You've got 5 minutes to plan. What I would be tempted to do first is write down the acronym PAFT. So that means purpose, audience, form, and tone. So what's the purpose of writing this? Well, you've been asked to write a piece of creative writing for a magazine. So it's a story. So I would say story is to entertain. Does it have a message? Does it have a big theme? Again, you're thinking about you're becoming the writer now. So you can use these. How are you going to craft something which is entertaining and engaging? Okay. What I would also do is I would maybe draw a Freytag's pyramid if you are unsure of what a Freytag's pyramid is, if you haven't covered it in school or college or wherever you may be, at whatever stage of your learning, just type in Freytag's pyramid and you will see the 5 main points of a story arc there. And then that will help you to do is to flesh out and plot out a structure of a story. And that's really important that you spend 5 minutes just thinking about your path and then thinking about building your Freytag's pyramid. But just going back to path, so we've got purpose for a story, it's to entertain, let's say very generally speaking. The audience, I will say for the top level marks, and I will show you in a second, that audience, really, you're writing to the examiner. So you're writing to the examiner and they want to see the top level of writing, which I will show you an example of in a second. But imagine an audience, it could be people of your age, whether that's school, college, or beyond. You know, think about always having an audience in mind, and this will inform your language, your tone, and this will direct how you're writing. The form, it's a story. So again, this is where Freytag's pyramid comes in. You want an exposition, an inciting incident, climax, a resolution, and a denouement. So again, if you're not really familiar with Freytag's pyramid, type it into Google or consult a book on creative writing, and that will provide you with a starting point. Okay. So with your description, again, because examiners are looking for a breakdown in content and organization, and 16 marks for technical accuracy, description really detailed, don't tell, show. That is my number one caveat that I say to all my students, all the people I've taught over the years is, give details, make the reader feel as if they're there inside the story. So you're using, you know, all your sensory language, all of your expertise in language crafting, all those kinds of things, really giving detail, just detail everything. With your SPAG as well, it's the elementary things like your full stops, your capital letters, but it's also examiners are looking for more ambitious vocabulary. They're also looking for a wider range and use of punctuation, those sorts of things to really give top level marks. Okay. What I will say as well with question five, I've spoken to lots of students over the years who flick through the pages as I am now, and they'll say, Sir, they'll say, Mr. Wise, how on earth am I meant to finish and meant to write all of these sheets of paper in time? You are not being asked to do that. What I would argue is, as examiners, we're looking for, again, the quality over the quantity. I would say for question five, a maximum 2 sides of A4. So really, all you're doing is you're writing your piece of creative writing on page 14, page 15, for example. You're filling out 2 sides of A4 because what that's showing the examiner is that you've got control over your craft, your creative writing craft. You're not just writing reams and reams and reams of pages. You can achieve top level piece of work in 2 sides of A4. Okay. So it's about your skills in doing that. You can achieve it in a short amount of time. The amount of question papers that I've marked where students have used up to 10 pages of writing and it's all of the same quality. It's not what we're looking for. It's achieving really high quality and really high standard in a couple of pages. That is max. That is all you need to do. Okay. So just as an example, I'll show you here. So this is a resource from AQA. This is from another past paper here. What the student's done there is they just looked at the picture as a suggestion and they've circled or squared in this instance detail which they have focused on. So the sky, you've got the waves, you've got the rocks. Again, you can focus on other aspects. So just for reference, this response it's a lower level 4, so it got 20 marks and it got 14 marks for AO6. So it's almost a top level. It's 6 marks shy of top level. So I will just give you some example here of what we're looking for at top level. So sophisticated vocabulary and successful linguistic devices. The darkness encapsulated the light, blanketing any sense of hope as the grey mass crept across the sky. From above, everything was silent, save for the water beneath the sky. So really detailed, really rich writing there. Sounds really professional. Sounds like something you'd almost pick up in a book in Waterstones. Highly accurate spelling. So again, rebelliously, crevice, not very common words, but these are the kinds of words that will gain you marks. Conscious crafting. So again, we can see that the student has really thought about what they're writing there. The really detailed description. So prominent and tall, the white structure seemed to look down at the wild sea in disgust and embarrassment, like a parent of a delinquent child. So really, really interesting description there. It's not just saying there were cliffs above the sea. It's like, well, yeah, okay. But it's really bringing that description to life. That is really nice. So that is the kind of description we'd be looking for at the top level. Disobediently, erratically, again, so highly accurate spelling that is going to award you marks. And I will just focus on the last bit here. Range of developed and complex ideas. So the strips of white raw wrestled with the dreary abundance of clouds, yearning for the chance to glide across the sky. Yet the constant dark sheet remained merciless, cold, denying any light through the barriers of gloom. Outstanding description there. Really, really detailed, really imaginative, really complex. And again, it links to all of these here. The student has managed to weave themes and big ideas through their writing. They're making patterns and connections. They are telling us something about the world. They're really sort of personifying, bringing the detail to life. But they've also really thought about their ordering, the audience and the purpose as well. It's about entertaining the audience, and it's really giving that purpose of its entertainment, isn't it? It's really rich and detailed. It really engages us. It's making us think and feel, isn't it? It's making us think and feel. It's really moody. It's really detailed. So, yeah, exactly that. It's for awarding higher level. Those are the kinds of things we're looking for. Okay. So that is question 5 done. What I would say is, as a final note, I'll talk through these and then I'll give you my final note. So again, for level 4, you're looking at communication is convincing and compelling, and I think I've showed you an example there. These are the content descriptors we are looking for AO5. And just very quickly, AO6 is technical accuracy. So again, I said it's our spelling, punctuation, and grammar. So for the top level, sentence demarcation is consistently secure and consistently accurate. So you can use punctuation effectively and confidently. Wide range of punctuation is used. Can you use your colons, your semicolons, your dashes, as well as your full stops and your commas and your apostrophes? Those simple things I would get practicing now. Use a full range of appropriate sentence forms for effect. Again, things like high level of accuracy in spelling and ambitious vocabulary. So these are what we're looking for here as markers, as examiners for the top level. What I would say is my final note for approaching the exam. I would always do question 5 first because it's 40 marks and you don't want to leave 10 minutes to achieve a 40-mark question. Okay, you want to give yourself maximum potential to get as many of these marks. It's worth half of your paper, 40 marks. Okay, so I would say do question 5 first. Then, because you have to read the whole source for question 3, this is going to help you for the remaining questions. So I would do question 3 second because you have to read the whole thing. So it's going to give you a greater sense of understanding about what's going on. Okay, so question 5, then question 3. Then I would focus on question 4 because that is a 20-mark question. You've already got some idea, haven't you, of what's going on in the story, but this is the second biggest amount of reading you have to do. So 5, 3, 4. I would then go to question 2. So you've got a smaller section there, and finally finish on question number 1. So that would be my approach. Thank you very much. I hope this video has been helpful for you, and good luck with your revision and good luck in your exams this summer.